The morning sun was shining bright over Clearwater Valley, and the parking lot at Mason's indoor shooting range was already getting busy. It was a Saturday, and Saturdays were always the best days at Mason's. Families would come in to learn about gun safety, friends would challenge each other to shooting competitions, and the regular customers would practice their skills. Sarah Chun pulled into the parking lot with her two teenage sons in the back seat. This was going to be their first time at a shooting range, and she wanted to make sure they learned the right way. Her husband Mike had been talking about teaching the boys about firearms for months, but Sarah wanted them to learn from professionals first. "Are you nervous?" she asked her older son Danny, who was 16 and trying to act cool about the whole thing. "No way, Mom," Danny said, but she could see he was excited. His younger brother Kevin, who was 14, was practically bouncing in his seat. Inside the range, the atmosphere was relaxed and friendly. The walls were covered with safety posters and pictures of local shooting competitions. Behind the front counter, Maria Santos was helping customers check in and explaining the range rules to newcomers. She had been working at Mason's for 3 years and knew every regular customer by name. "Good morning, folks," Maria said with a smile when Sarah and her sons approached the counter. "First time here?" "Yes," Sarah replied. "My sons want to learn about gun safety, and we heard this was the best place in town." Maria nodded approvingly. "You came to the right place. We take safety very seriously here. Let me get you set up with our basic safety course, and then we'll have one of our instructors work with you on the range." At that same moment, across the range, Tom Bradley was setting up his equipment at lane 12. Tom was a retired police officer who came to Mason's 3 times a week to stay sharp with his shooting skills. He knew everyone who worked there and had even helped train some of the newer employees. "Hey, Tom," called out Jake Morrison, one of the range safety officers. "How's retirement treating you?" Tom laughed. "Can't complain, though I miss the excitement sometimes." "Well, stick around here long enough, and you might get more excitement than you bargained for," Jake joked, not knowing how true his words would turn out to be. In a lane next to Tom, the Henderson family was having their own little competition. Dad was teaching his 12-year-old daughter Emma how to hold a pistol properly, while Mom was taking pictures to remember the day. Emma was a natural athlete who played soccer and basketball, and she was picking up the shooting techniques quickly. "Remember what I told you about breathing?" Mr. Henderson said softly to Emma. "Take a deep breath, let half of it out, then squeeze the trigger slowly." Emma nodded seriously and lined up her shot. When she hit the target close to the center, the whole family cheered. Other people in nearby lanes smiled and gave her thumbs up. This was the kind of thing that happened at Mason's all the time, people encouraging each other and celebrating small victories. Behind the front counter, Maria was explaining the range rules to Sarah and her boys. "The most important thing to remember," she said, "is that guns are always loaded until you prove they're not. Even if you think it's empty, you treat it like it's loaded. You never point a gun at anything you don't want to destroy, and you keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot." Danny and Kevin listened carefully. They had heard some of these rules before, but hearing them from a professional made it feel more real and important. "What happens if someone breaks the rules?" Kevin asked. "They get kicked out immediately," Maria said firmly. "We don't give second chances when it comes to safety. Everyone who comes through that door trusts us to keep them safe, and we take that responsibility very seriously." At lane 8, a group of college friends was having their own good time. It was spring break week, and they had decided to try something different instead of just going to the beach. None of them had much experience with guns, so they had signed up for a group lesson with one of the range instructors. "This is way cooler than I thought it would be," said Jessica, a pre-med student who was usually more comfortable with books than weapons. "I always thought shooting ranges would be scary, but everyone here is so helpful." Her friend Marcus nodded. "My dad always said I should learn about guns for self-defense, but I never got around to it. I'm glad we decided to do this together." The instructor working with them was Alex Rodriguez, a former military man who had been teaching shooting for 5 years. He loved working with beginners because he got to see them overcome their fears and gain confidence. "The key to good shooting," Alex was explaining, is consistency. Same stance, same grip, same breathing, every time. It's not about being strong or tough. It's about being precise and following the fundamentals. Meanwhile, at the Range's small cafe area, several customers were taking a break and chatting over coffee and sandwiches. Mason's was one of the few shooting ranges that had a cafe, and it had become a popular gathering spot for the local shooting community. Old Pete Morrison, Jake's father, was telling stories about his days hunting with his grandfather. At 82, Pete was still one of the best shots at the range, and younger shooters often asked him for advice. Back in my day, Pete was saying to a group of listeners, we learned to shoot out of necessity. Hunting put food on the table. Nowadays, most folks shoot for sport or protection, but the fundamentals are still the same. A young woman named Lisa was listening to Pete's stories while eating her lunch. She was a nurse at the local hospital and had started coming to the range 6 months ago after working too many night shifts in a rough part of town. Learning to shoot had given her confidence and a sense of control over her own safety. Mr. Pete, Lisa said, do you think women have a harder time learning to shoot than men? Pete smiled. Not at all, darling. Some of the best shooters I've ever known were women. They tend to listen better to instruction and don't let their ego get in the way of learning. Back on the range floor, Sarah's family was getting ready for their first lesson. Their instructor was going to be Jake Morrison, the same safety officer who had joked with Tom Bradley earlier. Jake was known for being patient with beginners and for his ability to make people feel comfortable even if they were nervous. All right, Chun family, Jake said cheerfully. Are you ready to learn something new? The boys nodded eagerly, and even Sarah seemed excited. Jake led them to lane 6, where he had already set up some basic targets and safety equipment. The first thing we're going to do, Jake explained, is learn how to safely handle a firearm. Before we even think about loading anything or pointing it downrange, you need to understand the basic safety rules. As Jake began his safety demonstration, the range continued to buzz with activity around them. The sound of conversations mixed with the controlled pops of gunfire from the active lanes. It was the sound of a busy, successful business where people came to learn, practice, and enjoy themselves safely. At the front desk, Maria was checking in another family, a father and his adult son who were planning to go hunting together next month. They wanted to practice with their rifles and make sure their scopes were properly adjusted. How busy does it usually get on Saturdays? The father asked. Maria looked around the range floor, which was about 3/4 full. This is pretty typical for a weekend. We get families like yourselves, competitive shooters preparing for matches, and people who just want to have some fun with friends. Everyone's here for different reasons, but they all follow the same safety rules. The father nodded approvingly. That's good to hear. Safety first, always. Absolutely, Maria agreed. We've been in business for 12 years, and we've never had a serious accident. We're proud of that record, and we work hard every day to maintain it. Little did anyone know that this perfect safety record was about to be tested in a way no one could have imagined. The range was full of laughter, conversations, and the sounds of people learning and enjoying themselves. Instructors were teaching, safety officers were monitoring, and customers were having a great time. But in exactly 37 minutes, something would happen that would change everything. Something that would turn laughter into screams, confidence into fear, and a safe place into a scene that would be talked about for years to come. For now, though, the range was exactly what it was supposed to be, a place where people came to learn, practice, and enjoy the sport of shooting in a safe, controlled environment. The Chun family was getting their first lesson. The Henderson family was celebrating Emma's good shooting, and the college friend were discovering that they actually enjoyed something they had never tried before. Tom Bradley was practicing his police training drills, thinking about the old days on the force. Maria was helping customers at the front desk, proud of the range's safety record. Jake was teaching the Chun family, and Alex was working with the college students. Everyone was doing exactly what they were supposed to be doing. Everyone was following the rules. Everyone felt safe. But sometimes, even when everyone does everything right, things can still go terribly wrong. And when that happens, the people who survive are the ones who can think clearly under pressure, help others when they're needed most, and find ways to turn a bad situation into something better. The Chin family didn't know it yet, but they were about to learn more about courage, quick thinking, and helping others than they had ever learned in any classroom. The Henderson family didn't know that Emma's steady hands and calm personality would soon be put to a much more serious test than hitting a target. Tom Bradley didn't know that his police training was about to become very relevant again. Maria didn't know that her knowledge of the range layout would soon help save lives. Jake and Alex didn't know that their leadership skills would be needed in ways they had never imagined. And old Pete Morrison, sitting in the cafe telling stories about hunting with his grandfather, didn't know that he was about to become part of a story that people would tell for generations to come. The range was full of laughter. Everyone was having a good time. The safety record was perfect, and nothing seemed like it could go wrong. But in 36 minutes, everything would change forever. The Chin family was 20 minutes into their safety lesson when Sarah noticed something that would later seem very important. A man in a dark jacket had been walking back and forth behind the shooting lanes, looking at different groups of people. She didn't think much of it at first. Maybe he was looking for friends or trying to decide which lane to use. "Mom, are you paying attention?" Danny asked, bringing Sarah's focus back to their lesson. "Sorry, honey," Sarah said. "I was just people watching." Jake Morrison, their instructor, smiled. "That's actually a good habit to have. Situational awareness is important everywhere, but especially in places like this. It's good to notice what's happening around you." Sarah nodded, but she kept thinking about the man in the dark jacket. Something about the way he was moving seemed off. He wasn't walking like someone who was comfortable in a range. He kept checking his watch and looking toward the exit doors. At the same time, across the range, Tom Bradley was having his own moment of concern. His police instincts were telling him something wasn't quite right, but he couldn't put his finger on what it was. The range seemed normal. People were shooting, talking, learning. But there was something in the air that felt different. Tom had learned during his 25 years as a cop to trust his gut feelings. They had saved his life more than once. Right now, his gut was telling him to pay attention. He finished loading his pistol and set it down on the counter in front of him, pointing downrange as always. Then he turned around to get a better look at the other people in the range. That's when he saw the man in the dark jacket. The man was standing near the cafe area now, and he was definitely acting strangely. He kept reaching into his jacket pocket and then pulling his hand back out. He was sweating, even though the range was kept at a comfortable temperature, and he was staring at the emergency exit signs. Tom had seen enough suspicious behavior in his career to recognize it when he saw it. This man was planning something, and whatever it was, it probably wasn't good. Meanwhile, the Henderson family was wrapping up their shooting session. Emma had done great with her first attempts, and her parents were proud of how well she had listened to instructions and followed safety rules. "Can we come back next week?" Emma asked her dad. "We'll see," Mr. Henderson replied. "If you keep up with your schoolwork and your soccer practice, maybe we can make this a regular thing." As they started packing up their equipment, Mrs. Henderson noticed that her husband seemed distracted. He was looking around the range instead of focusing on putting away their gear. "What's wrong?" she asked quietly. "Probably nothing," Mr. Henderson said, "but do you see that guy in the dark jacket over by the cafe? He's been acting weird for the last few minutes." Mrs. Henderson looked where her husband was pointing. The man was now talking to old Pete Morrison, but something about the conversation seemed forced. Pete looked uncomfortable, which was unusual for him. Pete was the kind of person who could talk to anyone about anything. In the cafe area, Pete was indeed feeling uncomfortable. The man in the dark jacket had approached him and started asking strange questions. "How many people work here?" the man had asked. "Why do you want to know?" Pete had replied, his friendly demeanor becoming more cautious. "Just curious," the man said, but his eyes were darting around the room. "How many exits are there?" This was when Pete knew something was wrong. In his 82 years, he had learned to read people pretty well, and this man was either in trouble or planning to cause trouble. Either way, Pete decided it was time to get help. "Excuse me," Pete said, standing up from his table. I need to go talk to someone. The man in the dark jacket grabbed Pete's arm. Wait, he said. Don't go anywhere. That's when Pete knew for certain that this was a dangerous situation. He looked around the cafe area and saw that Lisa, the young nurse, was still sitting at a nearby table. Their eyes met, and Pete could see that she had noticed something was wrong, too. Lisa had been trained in emergency situations through her work at the hospital. She recognized the signs of someone who was about to do something desperate. The man's behavior, his sweating, the way he was holding on to Pete, all of it pointed to a person who was in crisis and might be dangerous. She quietly reached for her phone and started typing a text message to 911. At the same time, she tried to think about what she could do to help Pete and protect the other people in the cafe. Back on the range floor, Alex Rodriguez was finishing up his lesson with the college students. They had all done well, and he was proud of how quickly they had learned the basic skills. You guys are naturals, Alex told them. If you want to continue learning, I'd recommend coming back in a couple of weeks for our intermediate class. Definitely, said Jessica, the pre-med student. This was way more fun than I expected. As the group started cleaning up their equipment, Alex noticed that Jake Morrison was trying to get his attention from across the range. Jake was pointing toward the cafe area and making hand signals that Alex recognized from his military days. The signals meant, potential threat, be ready, stay alert. Alex immediately became more serious. He told the college students to stay exactly where they were and not to move until he came back. Then, he started walking toward Jake's position, keeping his eyes on the cafe area. Sarah Chun had also noticed the change in atmosphere. Jake had stopped their lesson mid-sentence and was now standing in a way that blocked her family from the view of the cafe area. Is everything okay? Sarah asked. Jake was still watching the situation develop, but he answered her quietly. I'm not sure yet. I need you and your boys to stay right here and stay low. Can you do that for me? Sarah looked at her sons. Danny and Kevin could tell something was wrong, but they were following their mother's lead. All three of them crouched down behind the counter of their shooting lane. Should we call for help? Sarah whispered. Someone's already doing that, Jake replied, nodding toward the cafe area where he could see Lisa on her phone. Maria Santos, at the front desk, was starting to realize something was happening too. She had been watching the monitors that showed different areas of the range, and she could see that several customers and employees were acting unusually alert. She picked up her radio and quietly called for the range's security officer, Carlos Mendez. Carlos was a former Marine who worked part-time at the range, mainly to handle situations exactly like this one. Carlos, we might have a situation developing in the cafe area, Maria said into her radio, speaking quietly so customers near the front desk wouldn't hear. On my way, Carlos replied. But before Carlos could reach the cafe, the situation took a dramatic turn. The man in the dark jacket suddenly stood up from Pete's table and pulled something out of his pocket. It wasn't a gun. It was a small explosive device with wires and a timer. Everyone listen to me, the man shouted, loud enough for the entire range to hear. This place is going to blow up in 2 minutes unless you do exactly what I say. The range, which had been full of laughter and conversation just moments before, became completely silent. Everyone stopped what they were doing and stared at the man with the device in his hands. Pete Morrison, despite being 82 years old, was the first person to speak. Son, he said calmly, whatever's troubling you, this isn't the way to handle it. Let's talk about what's really going on. But the man was beyond talking. His hands were shaking, sweat was pouring down his face, and his eyes had the wild look of someone who had made a desperate decision and couldn't turn back. 2 minutes, he repeated, and if anyone tries to leave or call for help, I'll set it off right now. This was the moment when everything changed. This was when the range that had been full of laughter became a place where no one smiled. This was when ordinary people had to become heroes, when split-second decisions would determine who lived and who died. Tom Bradley, with his police training, was already thinking about tactical options. Alex Rodriguez was calculating distances and escape routes. Maria Santos was thinking about evacuation procedures. Carlos Mendez was moving into position. But it was Lisa, the young nurse, who made the first move that would save everyone's lives. She stood up from her table and walked directly toward the man with the bomb. "My name is Lisa," she said in the same calm voice she used with patients in the emergency room. "I can see that you're in pain. I work at the hospital, and I help people who are hurting. Will you let me help you?" Everyone in the range held their breath. Some people thought Lisa was crazy for walking toward danger. Others recognized that she was doing exactly what needed to be done. She was treating this like a medical emergency, because that's what it really was. The man looked at Lisa with confusion. This wasn't how he had expected people to react. He had expected screaming, panic, people running for the exits. Instead, he was facing a young woman who was talking to him like he was a patient who needed help. "You don't understand," he said, his voice breaking. "I've lost everything. My job, my house, my family. I don't have anything left." "I understand more than you think," Lisa replied, taking another step closer. "I see people who feel hopeless every day at work. But feeling hopeless and actually being hopeless are two different things." While Lisa was talking to the man, other people in the range were preparing to act. Tom Bradley had quietly moved into a position where he could tackle the man, if necessary. Alex Rodriguez was ready to help. Jake Morrison was making sure the family stayed safe. And old Pete Morrison, despite the danger he was in, was thinking about something his grandfather had told him many years ago. When people are desperate, they need someone to show them a different way. Pete stood up slowly and walked to Lisa's side. "Young man," Pete said gently, "I'm 82 years old, and I've seen a lot of people go through hard times. Some of the strongest people I know are people who lost everything and then found a way to build something new." The man looked back and forth between Lisa and Pete. These two people, a young nurse and an old man, were treating him like a human being instead of a threat. It was confusing and unexpected. "You said 2 minutes," Pete continued. "That timer's been going for about 30 seconds now. That means you still have time to make a different choice." The man looked down at the device in his hands. His finger was hovering over the button that would set it off immediately. "What if I can't change things?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if you can?" Lisa replied. That was when the real test began. In the next 90 seconds, everyone in the range would discover what they were really made of. They would find out if the training and preparation they had done would actually work in a crisis. They would learn whether ordinary people could really become heroes when a moment demanded it. The timer kept counting down, and no one was smiling anymore. 90 seconds left on the timer, and Lisa could see that her words were having an effect. The man's hand was shaking less, and he was looking at her face instead of staring wildly around the room. This was progress, but 90 seconds wasn't very much time to talk someone out of destroying themselves and everyone around them. "What's your name?" Lisa asked, taking another small step closer. "David," he replied after hesitating. "David Mitchell." "David, I'm going to ask you to do something that might sound crazy," Lisa said. "I want you to tell me about one good thing that happened to you this week. Just one thing." David looked at her like she had lost her mind. "Lady, I'm holding a bomb. Did you miss that part?" "I see the bomb," Lisa said calmly. "But I also see a person who's hurting so much that he thinks this is his only choice. I don't believe that's true. So tell me about one good thing." Pete Morrison was standing right next to Lisa now, and he added his own voice to hers. "David, I've lived through the Great Depression, World War II, and more personal tragedies than I care to count. And you know what I learned? There's always one good thing, even on the worst days." David was quiet for a moment, and everyone in the range could hear the timer ticking. 75 seconds left. "My dog," David said finally. "My dog Buddy was happy to see me this morning. He doesn't care that I lost my job or that my wife left me. He just wanted me to pet him and give him breakfast." Lisa smiled. "What kind of dog is Buddy?" "A golden retriever. He's 8 years old, and he still acts like a puppy sometimes." "Who's taking care of Buddy right now?" Pete asked gently. David's face changed when he realized what Pete was asking. He's at home. Alone. If I do this, no one will take care of him. 60 seconds left. While Lisa and Pete were talking to David, other people in the range were doing what they could to protect everyone else. Maria Santos had quietly activated the range's emergency lockdown system, which sealed the main entrance and sent an automatic alert to the police. She was also using hand signals to direct customers toward the emergency exits, just in case they needed to evacuate quickly. Tom Bradley had positioned himself where he could reach David in 3 quick steps if the talking didn't work. His police training had taught him to always have a backup plan, and his backup plan was to tackle David and try to get the bomb away from other people, even if it meant sacrificing himself. Alex Rodriguez was helping families with children move to safer positions. He had quietly explained to the college students and the Henderson family that they should be ready to hit the floor or run for the exits if he gave them a signal. Jake Morrison was still protecting the Chun family, but he was also thinking about something else. He had noticed that David's bomb looked homemade, and in his experience, homemade explosives were often less reliable than professional ones. There was a chance that the device might not work at all, or might not be as powerful as David thought it was. But Jake wasn't willing to bet people's lives on that possibility. He was ready to act if the talking didn't work. David, Lisa continued, if you set off that bomb, what happens to Buddy? He'll be waiting for you to come home, and you'll never show up. He won't understand why. Tears were starting to run down David's face. I can't take care of him anymore. I can't even take care of myself. There are people who can help with that, Pete said. My grandson runs a dog rescue organization. They help people who are going through tough times keep their pets. You don't have to choose between taking care of Buddy and getting help for yourself. 45 seconds left. David, Lisa said, I want you to look around this room. Do you see anyone here who looks like your enemy? David looked around the range. He saw families with children. He saw elderly people like Pete. He saw young people like the college students. He saw working people like the range employees. No, he admitted, these people didn't do anything to me. You're right, Lisa said. These people are just here having a normal Saturday, just like you probably were having normal Saturdays before everything went wrong. They have dogs at home too, and families and people who love them. But nobody loves me anymore, David said, his voice breaking. That's not true, Pete said firmly. Buddy loves you. And even if you don't believe it right now, there are other people who will love you again when you get through this hard time. 30 seconds left. This was when Carlos Mendez, the security officer, decided he had to act. He couldn't let the timer run out while they were still talking. He started moving quietly around the edge of the cafe area, trying to get close enough to David to grab the bomb, if necessary. But David saw him coming. Stop right there, David shouted, holding up the device. I said no one should move. Carlos froze, but now everyone in the range could see that their time was almost up. The tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. David, Lisa said urgently, you have 20 seconds to decide what kind of person you really are. Are you someone who hurts innocent people, or are you someone who's just going through the worst time of his life and needs help? David looked at the timer. 20 seconds. He looked at Lisa and Pete, who were standing close enough to be killed instantly if he pressed the button. He looked around the room at all the families and workers who were depending on his next decision. And then he looked at his own hands holding the device that could end all of their lives. 15 seconds. I don't want to hurt anyone, David said. I just want the pain to stop. The pain can stop without anyone getting hurt, Lisa said. You can put that device down, and we can get you help. Real help. 10 seconds. What if it's too late for me? David asked. It's only too late if you push that button, Pete replied. As long as you don't push that button, there's still hope. 5 seconds. David looked one more time around the room. Everyone was staring at him, waiting to see what he would do. Some people looked terrified. Others looked sad for him. But no one looked angry or hateful. 4 seconds. He thought about Buddy waiting at home for him. 3 seconds. He thought about Lisa and Pete, who had risked their lives to talk to him like he was a human being worth saving. 2 seconds. He thought about all the families in the range who just wanted to go home safely to their own pets and loved ones. 1 second. David closed his eyes and threw the bomb as hard as he could toward the far corner of the cafe, away from all the people. Then he dropped to his knees and started crying. The bomb hit the wall and fell to the floor. Everyone held their breath, waiting to see if it would explode on impact. It didn't explode. For a moment, no one moved. No one was sure if the danger was really over or if the device might still go off. Lisa was the first person to realize what needed to happen next. She ran to David and knelt down beside him. "You made the right choice," she said, putting her hand on his shoulder. "You saved everyone, including yourself." Pete walked over to where the bomb had landed and looked at it carefully. "Jake," he called out to the range safety officer, "you might want to call the bomb squad, but I think this thing might not even be real." Jake came over and looked at the device. Pete was right. It looked like it was made of clock parts and Play-Doh, not actual explosives. David had been so desperate and confused that he had convinced himself a fake bomb was real. But that didn't make what had just happened any less serious. David had threatened everyone's lives, and he was clearly in a mental health crisis that needed immediate attention. Tom Bradley approached David slowly, his police training taking over. "David, I'm going to need to place you under arrest, but first we're going to make sure you get medical attention." David nodded, still crying. "I'm sorry," he said over and over again. "I'm so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking." "You were thinking like someone who was in terrible pain and couldn't see any other way out," Lisa said gently. "That's not your fault, but getting help is your responsibility now." Carlos Mendez had already called 911, and within minutes the range was filled with police officers, paramedics, and bomb disposal experts. The customers were evacuated while the bomb squad confirmed that David's device was indeed fake. But even though the bomb wasn't real, the experience had been very real for everyone in the range. People were shaken up, scared, and tried to process what had just happened. The Chun family huddled together while they waited to be interviewed by police. Sarah kept thinking about how quickly everything had changed from a fun family activity to a life-threatening situation. "Mom," Danny said quietly, "are we going to be okay?" "Yes, honey," Sarah replied, though she wasn't entirely sure she believed it herself. "Everyone's safe now." The Henderson family was dealing with their own shock. Emma, who had been so excited about learning to shoot, was now wondering if shooting ranges were really safe places to be. "Dad," she asked, "was that man really going to hurt us?" Mr. Henderson didn't want to lie to his daughter, but he also didn't want to traumatize her. He was very sick and confused, sweetheart. Sometimes when people are that sick, they make bad decisions. But there were good people here who helped him make a better choice. The college students were trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Jessica, the pre-med student, was especially affected because she had seen Lisa risk her life to help someone else. "I want to be able to do what she did," Jessica told her friends. "I want to be the kind of person who can help in a crisis instead of just being scared." Old Pete Morrison was sitting in the cafe area, still thinking about what had just happened. At 82 years old, he had thought he'd seen everything life could throw at him. But today had reminded him that you're never too old to learn something new about courage and compassion. Maria Santos was coordinating with the police and making sure all the customers were accounted for. As the range manager, she felt responsible for everyone's safety, and she was already thinking about what changes they might need to make to prevent something like this from happening again. But the person everyone was talking about was Lisa, the young nurse who had walked toward danger instead of away from it. She was sitting with David while the paramedics checked him over, still talking to him calmly and helping him stay focused on getting the help he needed. "Why did you do that?" Tom Bradley asked her. "Why did you walk toward a man with a bomb?" Lisa thought about the question for a moment. "Because that's what you do," she said finally. "When someone's in trouble, you help them. It doesn't matter if they're a patient in a hospital or a confused man in a shooting range. You help. Weren't you scared?" Emma Henderson asked. "Of course I was scared," Lisa admitted. "But being scared doesn't mean you can't do the right thing. Sometimes doing the right thing is scary." As the police and paramedics finished their work and started clearing the scene, people began to realize that something important had happened here. Something more important than the fact that a disturbed man had threatened them with a fake bomb. What had happened was that ordinary people had acted with extraordinary courage and compassion. They had turned a potentially tragic situation into a story of hope and human decency. The range had been full of laughter when the day started. Then, for 40 terrifying seconds, no one had smiled. But now, as people started to recover from their shock, there were smiles again. Different smiles than before, deeper, more meaningful smiles between people who had shared something profound together. David Mitchell was taken to the hospital for psychiatric evaluation and treatment. But before he left, he asked to speak to Lisa and Pete one more time. "Thank you," he told them. "You saved my life just as much as you saved everyone else's." "You saved your own life," Pete replied. "We just reminded you that it was worth saving." As the range slowly returned to normal, people started talking about what they had learned from the experience. They had learned about courage, about compassion, about the importance of treating everyone with dignity, even in the worst circumstances. They had also learned that sometimes the people who seem the most dangerous are really just the people who are hurting the most. And sometimes the best way to stop someone from doing something terrible is to show them that they're not alone. The range would be full of laughter again soon, but it would never be quite the same because everyone who was there that day would remember what it felt like to see ordinary people do extraordinary things when the moment demanded it. 3 months after the incident at Mason's indoor shooting range, the place was busy again. The story had made national news, and people came from all over the country to visit the range where ordinary heroes had saved the day. But for the people who had actually been there, life was more complicated than the news story suggested. Sarah Chun was having trouble sleeping. Every night when she closed her eyes, she could see David Mitchell's face and remember the sound of the timer counting down. She had started seeing a counselor to help her deal with what psychologists call post-traumatic stress, but the healing process was slow. "I keep thinking about what could have happened," she told her therapist during one session. "What if Lisa hadn't been so brave? What if David had actually had a real bomb? What if my boys had been hurt?" But none of those things happened, the therapist reminded her. You can't live your life based on what might have happened. You have to focus on what actually did happen, and what actually happened is that everyone survived and David got help. Sarah knew the therapist was right, but knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally were two different things. She had started the day wanting to teach her sons about gun safety, and instead she had learned about a different kind of safety, the safety that comes from people looking out for each other in crisis situations. Danny and Kevin were handling the experience differently. Danny, who was 16 and trying to be mature about everything, had become very interested in emergency preparedness and first aid training. He had convinced his parents to let him take CPR class and had started reading books about crisis management. Kevin, who was 14 and more emotional than his older brother, had decided he never wanted to be around guns again. The shooting lesson that was supposed to be fun had become associated in his mind with danger and fear. "It's not the guns that were the problem," Sarah tried to explain to him. "The problem was that David was sick and needed help." "I know that in my head," Kevin replied, "but I can't make my feelings understand it." Sarah realized that Kevin was expressing something she felt too. Intellectually, she understood that shooting ranges were safe places where millions of people learned and practiced without incident. Emotionally, though, the range would always be the place where her family had been threatened. Meanwhile, the Henderson family was dealing with their own aftermath. Emma had surprised everyone by wanting to continue with shooting lessons. The incident had scared her, but it had also shown her what ordinary people could do in extraordinary circumstances. "I want to learn to be brave like Lisa was," Emma told her parents. "I want to be someone who helps people instead of someone who just runs away." Mr. and Mrs. Henderson weren't sure how to feel about their 12-year-old daughter drawing inspiration from such a traumatic event. They were proud of her maturity and her desire to help others, but They were also concerned about her processing the experience in a healthy way. They decided to let Emma continue with shooting lessons, but they also enrolled her in other activities that would teach her about helping people, volunteering at the local animal shelter, joining a youth first aid program, and participating in community service projects. Being brave doesn't always mean facing down dangerous people, Mrs. Henderson explained to Emma. Most of the time, being brave means doing small, everyday things that help make the world a little bit better. Emma nodded, but she had already decided that when she grew up, she wanted to be either a nurse like Lisa or a police officer like Mr. Bradley. She wanted a job where helping people in crisis was part of the daily routine. The college students who had been taking their first shooting lesson that day had all been affected differently as well. Jessica, the pre-med student, had changed her career focus from general medicine to emergency medicine. The incident had shown her that she wanted to work in situations where she could make immediate, life-saving differences in people's lives. Before that day, Jessica told her academic advisor, "I thought I wanted to be a family doctor or maybe work in research. But seeing what Lisa did made me realize that I want to be in the emergency room, helping people in crisis." Her friend Marcus had gone in the opposite direction. The experience had been so stressful for him that he had decided he needed to find ways to reduce stress and conflict in his life, not increase it. He had started studying meditation and conflict resolution with the goal of becoming a counselor or a therapist. "I realized that day that I'm not the kind of person who runs toward danger," Marcus explained to his friends. "But maybe I could be the kind of person who helps prevent dangerous situations from developing in the first place." The third member of their group, a business major named Carlos, not to be confused with Carlos Mendez, the security guard, had been inspired to change his focus from corporate business to nonprofit management. He wanted to work for organizations that help people like David Mitchell before they reach crisis points. "There are probably hundreds of people like David in our city right now," Carlos said. "People who have lost jobs, lost families, lost hope. If we can help them before they get desperate, maybe we can prevent more situations like what happened at the range." Alex Rodriguez, the former military instructor who had been teaching the college students, was proud of how they had all channeled their experience into positive life changes. But he was dealing with his own challenges. As a former soldier, Alex thought he would handle the civilian crisis easily. But he discovered that protecting people in a combat zone was very different from protecting families and children in what was supposed to be a safe, recreational environment. "In the military, you expect to face danger," Alex explained to his wife. "Everyone there is signed up for it, and everyone is training. But these people at the range were just families trying to have a good time. They trusted us to keep them safe, and we almost failed." Alex's wife pointed out that they hadn't failed. Everyone had survived, and David had gotten help. But Alex couldn't shake the feeling that things could have gone very wrong very quickly, and that luck had played a bigger role than skill in the positive outcome. He started volunteering with organizations that provided mental health support for veterans and other people in crisis. He figured that if he couldn't prevent every dangerous situation, at least he could help address some of the root causes that led people to desperate actions. Tom Bradley, the retired police officer, was probably handling the aftermath better than anyone else. His police experience had taught him that dangerous situations were part of life, and that the important thing was how people responded to them. But even Tom was affected by the experience in unexpected ways. He started thinking about all the times during his police career when he had dealt with people like David Mitchell, people who were desperate and confused and making terrible decisions because they couldn't see any alternatives. "I wonder how many Davids I arrested over the years without really understanding what was driving them," Tom told his wife. "I did my job and got dangerous people off the streets, but I never thought much about what happened to them after that." Tom started volunteering with a program that helped former inmates reintegrate into society. He realized that his law enforcement experience could be valuable in helping people avoid the kinds of situations that led to desperate actions. Old Pete Morrison, at 82, was probably the person who was least changed by the incident. He had lived through enough crises in his long life to know that dangerous moments come and go, but what matters is how people treat each other during those moments. People keep asking me if I was scared, Pete told his grandson. Of course I was scared, but scared isn't the same as helpless. There's almost always something you can do to help, even if it's just treating someone with dignity when they're at their worst. Pete had started visiting David Mitchell in the psychiatric facility where he was receiving treatment. At first, David was embarrassed and ashamed to see Pete, but Pete's consistent kindness gradually helped David begin to forgive himself and focus on getting better. He's not a bad person, Pete told people who questioned why he would visit someone who had threatened his life. He's a sick person who made bad decisions when he was in pain. There's a difference. Lisa, the nurse who had become the hero of the story, was struggling with all the attention she was receiving. News reporters wanted to interview her, shooting organizations wanted to give her awards, and people kept telling her how brave and wonderful she was. But Lisa didn't feel brave or wonderful. She felt like she had done what anyone in her position should have done, and she was uncomfortable with being treated like some kind of superhero. I just did my job, she told a reporter who wanted to do a follow-up story. I'm a nurse. When I see someone in medical distress, whether it's physical or mental, I try to help them. David was clearly having a psychiatric emergency, so I treated it like any other medical emergency. The reporter pressed her for more dramatic quotes, but Lisa refused to sensationalize what had happened. She was more interested in talking about the need for better mental health services and suicide prevention programs than in discussing her own actions. Lisa had started working with local mental health organizations to develop better crisis intervention protocols. She wanted to make sure that the next David Mitchell would get help before he reached the point of threatening other people. Maria Santos, the range manager, had implemented new security procedures and employee training programs. But she was also dealing with business challenges. Some customers were afraid to return to the range, while others came specifically because of the incident, treating it like a tourist attraction. I wish people would stop calling it the place where the bomb threat happened, Maria told her boss. We want to be known as a safe place where people learn responsible gun handling, not as a place where dramatic things happen. Maria was working with local mental health professionals to train her employees in recognizing signs of psychological distress in customers. She wanted the range to be a place where someone like David Mitchell would be offered help before he reached a crisis point. Jake Morrison, the safety instructor who had been teaching the Chun family, had started studying psychology and counseling techniques. He realized that range safety wasn't just about preventing accidents with firearms. It was also about recognizing when customers might be dealing with emotional or mental health issues that could affect their judgment and behavior. We teach people about muzzle direction and trigger discipline, Jake told his fellow instructors, but we should also teach people to recognize when someone might be in crisis and need help. Carlos Mendez, the security officer, had mixed feelings about his performance during the incident. He was proud that no one had been hurt, but he was concerned that he had been ready to tackle David, even if it meant setting off what they thought was a real bomb. I was prepared to sacrifice myself to save everyone else, Carlos told his family. And I would do it again if I had to, but I keep wondering if there was a smarter way to handle the situation. Carlos had started studying de-escalation techniques and crisis negotiation. He wanted to be better prepared if anything like this ever happened again, and he wanted to help train other security personnel in handling similar situations. The incident had affected everyone who was there, but it had also created bonds between them that wouldn't have existed otherwise. The Chin family had become friends with the Hendersons, united by their shared experience. The college students stayed in touch, supporting each other as they processed their trauma and made life changes inspired by what they had witnessed. Lisa had become something of a mentor to Jessica, the pre-med student who wanted to work in emergency medicine. Tom Bradley was helping Alex Rodriguez with his veteran outreach work. Pete Morrison was sharing his stories and wisdom with anyone who wanted to listen. But the most important relationship that had developed was between the people who had been there and David Mitchell himself. As David received treatment and gradually got better, he was able to understand what had really happened that day and why people had responded to him with compassion instead of just fear. I was so desperate that I convinced myself a fake bomb was real, David told his therapist. But those people saw through my desperation to the person underneath who needed help. They saved my life by treating me like I was worth saving. David's recovery was slow and difficult, but he was making progress. He had found a new apartment that allowed pets, so Buddy was back in his life. He was working with job counselors to find employment that wouldn't trigger his depression and anxiety. And he was participating in support groups for people who had struggled with suicidal thoughts. Most importantly, David was learning to reach out for help before he reached crisis points. He had a whole network of support: his therapist, his support group, the staff at the community mental health center, and even some of the people from the range who had stayed in touch with him. I used to think that needing help meant I was weak, David told the support group. But those people at the range showed me that helping each other is what makes us strong. The story of what happened at Mason's indoor shooting range had become more than just a news story about a bomb threat that turned out to be fake. It had become a story about how communities respond to people in crisis, about how ordinary people can do extraordinary things when circumstances demand it, and about how the worst moments in life can sometimes lead to the most important personal growth. The range was full of laughter again, just like it had been before the incident. But the laughter was different now, deeper, more appreciative, more conscious of how quickly things can change and how important it is to take care of each other. People still came to learn about gun safety, to practice their shooting skills, and to enjoy time with friends and family. But they also came because they knew this was a place where people had chosen compassion over fear, where they had treated someone at his worst moment with dignity and respect, and where they had proven that even in the most frightening situations, hope and humanity can win. The incident had lasted only 40 seconds, but its impact would last for the rest of the lives of everyone who was there. And perhaps that was the most important lesson of all, that 40 seconds can change everything, but only if people are brave enough and compassionate enough to make the right choices when those 40 seconds count the most. 1 year later, Mason's indoor shooting range looked almost exactly the same as it had before the incident. The same safety posters cover the walls, the same friendly staff worked behind the counter, and the same sounds of conversation and controlled gunfire filled the air. But for anyone who looked closely, there were signs that something important had changed. There was a small plaque by the entrance that read, "In recognition of the courage and compassion shown by our customers and staff on March 15th, 2025. Sometimes the greatest strength is shown in how we treat those who need help the most." Next to it was an information board about local mental health resources and crisis support services. Sarah Chun was back at the range for the first time since the incident. She had finally felt ready to continue the gun safety lessons that had been interrupted so dramatically a year before. This time, though, she came alone. Danny was away at college, where he was studying emergency management, and Kevin had decided that shooting sports weren't for him, which Sarah completely understood and supported. "It feels strange being back here," Sarah told Jake Morrison, who was once again her instructor. "I imagine it does," Jake replied. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Sarah nodded. "I've been working with a counselor, and she helped me realize that I was letting fear make decisions for me. I don't want to let what happened with David define how I feel about this place or about the people who work here. You all did everything right that day." Jake smiled. "We all did what we could, but you're the one who had to live with the aftermath. I'm proud of you for coming back when you felt ready." As Sarah set up at the shooting lane, she noticed that the range's safety protocols had been expanded. In addition to the usual rules about handling firearms, there was now information about recognizing signs of emotional distress in other customers and how to get help if you or someone else was struggling with mental health issues. We learned that safety isn't just about preventing accidents with guns, Maria Santos explained to a group of new customers during their orientation. Safety is also about taking care of each other as human beings. The new protocols were part of a comprehensive program that had been developed with input from mental health professionals, law enforcement, and the customers who had been there during the incident. The goal was to create an environment where someone like David Mitchell would be offered support and resources long before they reach a crisis point. Across the range, Emma Henderson was practicing with her father. Now 13 years old, she had become an accomplished shooter and was planning to try out for her school's marksmanship team. But more importantly, she had become involved in peer counseling and conflict resolution programs at school. I learned that day that helping people doesn't always mean doing dramatic things, Emma told her father as they took a break between rounds. Most of the time, it's just about paying attention to when someone seems sad or scared and letting them know that someone cares. Emma had stayed in touch with Lisa, the nurse who had become her role model. Through Lisa's influence, Emma had started volunteering at the local animal shelter and had joined a youth group that visited elderly residents at nursing homes. Lisa taught me that being brave isn't about not being scared, Emma explained to a friend who asked why she spent so much time volunteering. Being brave is about doing good things even when you are scared. In the cafe area of the range, old Pete Morrison was telling stories to a new group of listeners. At 83 now, Pete had become something of a local celebrity because of his role in the incident, but he was more interested in using his platform to talk about important issues than in basking in attention. People always want to hear about that day when a young man brought the bomb, Pete was saying to a group that included several new shooting enthusiasts. But what they really should want to hear about is what we learned from it. One of the listeners, a woman who was new to shooting sports, asked what he meant by that. We learned that the person who seems the most dangerous might really be the person who needs help the most, Pete explained. We learned that treating people with dignity and respect can sometimes save lives. And we learned that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they choose to act with courage and compassion instead of just fear. Pete had indeed continued visiting David Mitchell throughout his recovery and had become something of a grandfather figure to him. Their friendship had become an important part of both of their healing processes. David taught me something too, Pete continued. He taught me that it's never too late in life to learn new ways to help people. I may be 83, but I can still make a difference in someone's life. The college students who had been there that day had all graduated and moved on to new phases of their lives, but they stayed in touch and still talked about how the experience had shaped their career choices and personal values. Jessica had indeed become an emergency room doctor, and she had implemented training programs at her hospital based on what she had learned about crisis intervention. She frequently told the story of Lisa's courage to medical students, emphasizing that healing was about more than just treating physical symptoms. Sometimes the most important medicine is showing people that they matter and that they're not alone, Jessica would tell her students. Technical skills are important, but compassion can literally save lives. Marcus had become a licensed counselor specializing in suicide prevention and crisis intervention. He worked with people who were going through the kinds of struggles that David had experienced, helping them find alternatives to desperate actions. I learned that day that I'm not the kind of person who runs toward physical danger, Marcus would tell his clients. But I discovered that I could be the kind of person who runs toward emotional danger, who isn't afraid of sitting with people when they're in their darkest moments. Carlos, the business major, had started a nonprofit organization that provided emergency financial assistance and job placement services for people who had lost their employment. His organization had helped dozens of people avoid the kind of desperation that had driven David to his breaking point. We can't prevent every crisis, Carlos would tell potential donors, but we can catch people before they fall so far that they can't see any way back up. Alex Rodriguez had completed additional training in psychological first aid and crisis counseling and had become the range's go-to person for handling customers who seemed to be struggling with emotional issues. He had helped several people get connected with mental health resources before their problems escalated to dangerous levels. The military taught me to neutralize threats, Alex would explain to other shooting instructors at conferences. But civilian life taught me that sometimes the best way to neutralize a threat is to help the person who poses it. Tom Bradley had become involved in police training programs, teaching officers about de-escalation and crisis intervention. He used the story of David Mitchell as a case study in how understanding and compassion could be more effective than force in resolving dangerous situations. We had a man with what we thought was a bomb threatening a room full of people, Tom would tell police trainees. The situation was resolved not by tactical action, but by two people who were willing to treat the suspect as a human being who needed help. Carlos Mendez had left his part-time security job at the range to become a full-time crisis counselor and de-escalation trainer. He worked with businesses, schools, and other organizations to help them prepare for situations involving people in psychological crisis. Security isn't just about stopping bad people from doing bad things, Carlos would tell his workshop participants. Sometimes security means helping confused and desperate people make better choices. Maria Santos had become a regional leader in developing safety protocols that addressed both physical and emotional well-being. She consulted with other shooting ranges and recreational facilities about creating environments that were safe in all the ways that mattered. We used to think that safety meant preventing accidents, Maria would tell other business owners. Now we understand that safety means creating a community where people take care of each other. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation had been in David Mitchell himself. After 18 months of intensive therapy, medication management, and participation in support groups, David had not only recovered from his crisis, but had become an advocate for mental health awareness and suicide prevention. David had started speaking at conferences, schools, and community events about his experience and recovery. He talked honestly about the desperation that had driven him to threaten innocent people, but more importantly, he talked about the people who had shown him a different way forward. I was convinced that my life was over and that no one would ever care about me again, David would tell audiences. But the people at that shooting range showed me that even someone at their absolute worst can still be treated with dignity and compassion. They saved my life not by overpowering me, but by reminding me that I was still a human being worth saving. David had found stable employment working for a nonprofit organization that provided services to people experiencing homelessness and mental health crises. His own experience with desperation and recovery made him uniquely qualified to help others who were going through similar struggles. I know what it feels like to believe you have no options left, David would tell his clients. But I also know what it feels like to discover that there are always more options than you can see when you're in crisis. David had also been reunited with his family, though the process had been slow and difficult. His ex-wife and children had needed time to forgive him and to trust that he was really better. But gradually, with the help of family therapy and David's consistent demonstration of his recovery, they had been able to rebuild their relationships. My dad is different now, David's teenage daughter had told her school counselor. He's still my dad, but he's also someone who really understands how important it is to get help when you need it. He talks about feelings now in a way that he never did before. Buddy, David's golden retriever, had played an important role in his recovery. The dog's unconditional love and dependence on David had given him a reason to keep going during the hardest parts of his treatment. Pet therapy had become a regular part of David's wellness routine. Buddy never cared about my mistakes or my mental illness, David would tell people. He just cared that I was there to take care of him. Sometimes that's exactly the kind of love a person needs to remember that their life has value. On the first anniversary of the incident, the range held a special event to commemorate what had happened and to celebrate how the community had grown from the experience. Many of the people who had been there that day returned for the event, along with community leaders, mental health professionals, and others who had been inspired by the story. Lisa, the nurse whose courage had sparked the peaceful resolution, spoke to the crowd about the importance of treating people in crisis with compassion rather than just fear. What happened here a year ago wasn't really about a bomb threat, Lisa told the audience. It was about what happens when people choose to see someone's humanity even in their worst moment. It was about what happens when we respond to crisis with love instead of just fear. Pete Morrison, now 83, also spoke at the event. I've lived long enough to see a lot of tragedy and a lot of heroism, he said. But I've learned that the most important heroism is the everyday kind, the heroism of treating people with kindness, of offering help to those who need it, and of believing that everyone deserves a chance at redemption. David Mitchell was the final speaker at the event. Standing before a crowd that included many of the people whose lives he had threatened a year earlier, he spoke about forgiveness, recovery, and the possibility of positive change even after terrible mistakes. I can never undo what I did that day, David said. I can never take back the fear I caused or the trauma I inflicted on innocent people. But I can spend the rest of my life proving that people can change, that recovery is possible, and that sometimes the worst moments in our lives can lead to the most important growth. After the formal program ended, people mingled and shared their own stories about how the incident had affected their lives. Some talked about career changes, others about new volunteer commitments, and many about a deeper appreciation for the importance of mental health and community support. Sarah Chan found herself talking with David Mitchell for the first time since that terrifying day. She had been nervous about the encounter, but she found that David was nothing like the desperate, confused man she remembered. I want you to know that I forgive you, Sarah told David. And I want to thank you for getting the help you needed and for using your experience to help other people. David was moved to tears by her words. Thank you, he said. That means more to me than I can express. I know I put you and your sons in danger, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to make sure that never happens to anyone else. As the event wound down and people began to leave, the range slowly returned to its normal activities. New customers came in for lessons, regular customers practiced their skills, and the staff continued their work of promoting safe, responsible shooting sports. But everyone who had been there that day, and everyone who had heard their story, carried with them the knowledge that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary compassion, that crisis can lead to growth, and that sometimes the most dangerous situations can be resolved through understanding and kindness rather than force. The range was full of laughter again, just as it had been before the incident. But the laughter was richer now, informed by the knowledge of how quickly things can change and how important it is to take care of each other. It was the laughter of people who had been tested by crisis and had chosen to respond with their best qualities rather than their worst fears. Mason's indoor shooting range had become more than just a place to learn about firearms. It had become a symbol of how communities can respond to mental health crises with compassion and wisdom, how ordinary people can act with extraordinary courage when circumstances demand it, and how the worst moments in life can sometimes lead to the most important positive changes. The plaque by the entrance would remain there for years to come, reminding everyone who entered that this was a place where people had chosen love over fear, where they had treated someone at his worst moment with dignity and respect, and where they had proven that even in the most frightening situations, humanity and hope can triumph. The range was full of laughter, and this time everyone was smiling, not just because they were having fun, but because they knew they were part of something bigger and more important than themselves. They were part of a community that had been tested by crisis and had emerged stronger, wiser, and more compassionate than before. And that, perhaps, was the most important lesson of all, that the measure of a community is not whether it ever faces difficult situations, but how it chooses to respond when those situations arise. The people at Mason's indoor shooting range had shown that when faced with crisis, they would choose courage over cowardice, compassion over cruelty, and hope over despair. The range would continue to be full of laughter for many years to come. And everyone who heard this story would remember that sometimes, in just 40 seconds, Ordinary people can prove that extraordinary goodness is always possible.